Hi, I'm Sanjay Sharma, editor-in-chief of Medskl.com, and welcome to If I Knew Then, a show that's based on a very simple premise, that when everything is said and done, life comes down to a few key moments. We're thrilled to have Dr. Wendy Stewart on the line, who's an associate professor at Dalhousie University. She's an outstanding clinician in the area of pediatric neurology and is a very passionate supporter of arts and humanities and in terms of infusing it into the medical curriculum and influencing the next generation of students. And I'll also say Dr. Stewart is one of our outstanding contributors for two Medskl.com modules. So it's a pleasure to have you, and welcome, and happy Valentine's Day today to you too, Dr. Stewart.
Thank you. Happy Valentine's Day to you as well.
Thank you. So why don't we just take it, from the very beginning? Now, you grew up in Scotland, and take me through maybe a few of the key influences that that I think that A, are important for who you are today, and B, might have set the seeds for thinking about a career in medicine.
Yeah, so I grew up in Dundee in Scotland, and when I was going through school, originally I wanted to be a vet, but I kind of changed my mind about that. And then I decided to go into science without really a clear path. But while I was in my undergrad at Dundee University, I got to know Professor Roy Foster, who was just an amazing man and very supportive and encouraging. And really, it was him that drew me to doing a research course after my undergrad, and also encouraged me to travel, because I'd originally wanted to go to Canada to travel and then come back and get a job in Scotland. But he said, well, Wendy, why don't you do your graduate studies there? You get to do research, further your career. And here I ended up in Canada and stayed. So after 2 years at UBC, while in my graduate studies, I decided I didn't want to go back. So that was the first point, really, that changed my whole plan for my life in terms of where I would live and what the future might hold.
Now, take me through that interaction a bit. Like, was that, because one of the things that I'm, just really bullish on is the concept of mentorship. And I think that, not only for undergraduates and, physicians and residents, but I think at any stage in our life, it's really important to try to get excellent mentors. And so, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how some of our students can really get solid mentors.
Well, at that point in my life, I came from a family that had no academic background. So nobody had ever gone to university before. They had no concept of really what I was trying to do. And so it was interesting to have a person like him take an interest in my future and what mattered. And it really meant a lot to me to have someone kind of walk that path with you, and also to share with you and talk with you to see what you're interested in, and also encourage you to pursue something that you may not have done. But I guess what he did for me is he believed in me, and that was really a very powerful thing at the time.
And so you did was it chemistry that you did and was that UBC, or where did you do the chemistry?
So I did my undergrad in chemistry in Dundee. So after, it's a little bit different structure in the UK universities, but I ended up doing the last 2 years in chemistry. So you get your honours degree in chemistry. And then I went to UBC and did my PhD in chemistry.
I see. Okay. And then, and was it towards the, in the midst of the PhD that you said, okay, you started thinking more about medicine, or take me through that decision-making process?
Yeah, so I had absolutely no intention of doing medicine. So to have ended up where I am is quite amazing, really. But again, there was a couple of influences in my life, and Dr. John Perry, who's now dead actually, but he was a well-known MS researcher in Canada. And I had a very unusual PhD in chemistry because it was when MRI first came to Canada. So we had the first prototype in Vancouver, and I got the chance to do MS research with him. So looking at animal models for MS and also post-mortem studies in patients. And he would share with me some of the other clinical work that was going on, and I thought I'd rather be there. And it really got me thinking about that desire to have that connection with the people. And so when him and I talked about it, it really made me think that's what I'd like to do. But there was still quite a few years went by after that, because I was on a student visa before I actually applied.
Oh, interesting. And so then you make the decision, you apply, and then you do your medical school in Calgary.
That's right. So by then I was getting old, and I was conscious that I should be mindful about when I finished. And so I'd applied to McMaster in Calgary because there were 3-year
Sure,
programs,
sure, yeah, yeah.
and I thought that would appeal to me as an older student. And I was fortunate to get into Calgary, and that's where I ended up.
And tell us some of the highlights, of what being a medical student at Calgary was like for you.
So one of the highlights for me was I found the first 2 years a real challenge before the clinical because I'd never done multiple choice ever. My undergrad and postgrad were all short answer and essays. And so to suddenly be confronted with exams and multiple choice was brutal to say the least. And so that was a transition for me. But when I got into the clinical, it just fitted and it was fun. And I had a great group that I was traveling through the clerkship track with that we would have such a laugh. Like we would be there at the crack of dawn for surgery, looking at each other like, what do we write in the chart? Because the patient was asleep, and just having fun with that, it was great. And then the other strong memory for me was in internal medicine and the residents and what great teachers they were. And also, again, very supportive and I would say mentoring.
And was there, I look back when I went to med school, and again, it was many years ago as well. There's certainly a few kind of critical cases that, either changed the way you practice medicine or even on a deeper level, change the way that you may think or may interact with your family or in the community. And so I'm just interested to, was there any interesting, kind of moments that you really, upon reflection really were important to you?
There's been many along the way. One that it's not quite an early medical school, but not too long after I finished, I had a young child who unfortunately ended up with brain injury from which they couldn't recover. And the family had to make a really difficult decision about taking the child off the ventilator, and I knew they would die. And so the family said to me that we can't face telling everybody or explaining to anyone what this might mean. And I had to speak with a huge number of people all at once. This was family and friends. And it was very powerful because everyone ended up on the same page so they could support the family. But I was also struck by the level of trust that they placed in me. And I've never forgotten that. And it also was a real lesson to me that relationship you build with people is so key to providing good care.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, you're very right. It's a privileged position in a lot of ways that we have, and I think it's obviously we're interacting with people at their most difficult times, and so it's always very important, I think, for the students to remember that and take those lessons home. Okay, so you were in Calgary, 3-year program, and then so when did you hone right in on pediatrics? Was there something that you said, okay, I'm really, I love kids and I want to try to help them out, or what did that look like?
Well, I've been looking after kids and been involved in camps and all sorts of stuff since I was a teenager. So for me, there wasn't really another option. When I got into medicine, I knew I would do pediatrics something. And originally, actually, I got really interested in pediatric cardiology and I loved it. I mean, even though I'd done the neurologic research, I was really torn because I thought, well, I don't want to be pigeonholed into that just because it seems like a natural choice. So I really looked at cardiology, but I just still found the brain more fascinating. And so that's still where I went. So I did my pediatrics and neurology at the IWK in Halifax.
Oh, wonderful. So, and right now when you're in St. John, and so is most of your kind of career seeing pediatric neurology cases then? Is that exclusive or?
So in terms of my clinical work, yes. So I'm half-time with Dalhousie and half-time clinical. And so all the patients I see are children with neurologic disorders. So that would primarily be epilepsy. And then the other two top ones would be headache and developmental delay.
Interesting. So I know every day is probably a little different for you, but why don't you just walk us through kind of a typical day for you?
Well, people would tease me that I don't have a typical day. Everything is so different because I move around so much. But if I'm doing clinic, I usually go in earlier than this and then start patients at 9 o'clock. Because of the kind of problems that I see in the kids, I usually spend an hour with somebody for a consult, and then it's about a half hour for a follow-up. So from 9 till 6 or so, I would see patients, and then sometimes there's little gaps, and so I would read EEGs when I'm doing that, and also try to do the paperwork as I go along. Because if I were to give, when I have students come and I give advice, I said, don't leave your charting, like do it as you go, because you really do it well then, and it's also very fresh in your mind, and you capture the nuance of what you were thinking.
Yeah, I think that's very, very good advice. And so you spend some of your time in St. John, some of it in Halifax,
Yeah.
And so and you obviously have a lot of other interesting things in your life. And so, any thoughts on just sort of life-work balance for our medical students?
So I'm always talking to the students that I get to know about the importance of having things in your life that take you away from medicine. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean your thoughts are there with whatever you're doing. So it could be some kind of mindfulness, but it could be an activity that you get lost in and just enjoy. And for me, that's always been music. And I really encourage people to find that, whatever it might be. It might be sports, it could be music, it might be art, whatever. But you have to have something like that, because there has to be space for you to just replenish yourself and have fun. And I love games. That's something else I love to do. So I have friends that we play games, and but music's always been a key part of my life. So all through my training and on into practice, I've been a member of a band, sometimes multiple bands, and so that's been a lot of fun. And we usually have great fun together. So when we practice, it's good.
And what instrument is it again?
So I play piano accordion. I wanted to play it since I was 4, and I started lessons at the Dundee Accordion School of Music when I was 9.
That's very interesting. And what's your what's out of interest? What's your favorite game?
Well, if I had my way, I'd probably say charades, because I'm a drama queen, and I also love to just have fun and with role plays and things like that. So I drive all my friends and colleagues crazy with stuff like that.
That's very interesting. Now let's talk a little bit about the arts, because I know that's something you're quite passionate about. And so we've talked a little bit about music, but you serve as a director of humanities, and there's a program, I think, is it called the HELP program or HEAL program?
Heal. So it
HEAL.
was it's healing and education through the arts and life sciences. So that's sort of the acronym added to humanities for the medical program at Dalhousie. And this was started by Jock Murray, a former dean at the university, and he was actually a neurologist, or he's a retired neurologist now. And he started it, his primary interest was in the history of medicine, but then it's grown to involve a history of medicine, music in medicine. There's also been at various points like art shows, and sometimes, depending on which students have interest, there's been issues and things addressed around spirituality. There's been book clubs. And so these are all the extracurricular, but I'm also interested in how it can be integrated into the curriculum. And like everywhere, the curriculum's tight for time. And so I'm always trying to think about ways that you can kind of add it as a piece of training as opposed to taking up extra time. And so we have components in all our longitudinal unit called professional competencies. So we added in humanities content called Out of the Box.
Wow.
And so that's in there in all the cases, which just gives the students a different way to think about it. And it might be a poem, it might be a video, a piece of art, photography, whatever. It could be anything. And they just gives them a chance to reflect a little differently on the patient experience and perhaps think a little deeply about it that they may not have done.
That's really interesting. I mean, I know that there were some researchers, I think, at Harvard who are looking specifically at visual art and trying to infuse it early on in the curriculum to improve diagnostic accuracy. And so I agree 100%. I mean, I think that, obviously the past 20 years and the emphasis of of McMaster in particular in the medical curriculum, evidence-based medicine and, sort of scientific mathematical concepts have really risen to the forefront. But I think we're also starting to see, the importance of the other side of the brain through softer skills like, communication, being active or attentive listeners, and even things like, art influencing the diagnostic side. So it's kind of like this circle where, both sides of our brains communicate with one another to make a better physician overall.
I think that the arts have a huge place. It's finding the hook to help people see that value. The fact that it is thought of as soft skills and kind of fluffy is a challenge. But I really have seen, I've had the opportunity to meet and attend conferences and meetings with scholars from the medical humanities, and the things they think about in terms of their critical thinking can really be of benefit to us as physicians and vice versa. So I feel like those kind of collaborations could be incredibly powerful to help students hone their skills, deal with the ambiguity in medicine. I'm really interested in how you can use the arts to foster critical thinking, which is of huge importance because of the medical error from physician thinking error. And so I offer workshops around the use of the different types of arts, music, so it includes performing arts, visual art, music, encompassing that into a workshop to get people thinking about cognitive biases and critical thinking and how you might change that.
I find it very fascinating, and especially because, what I do a lot as a retina specialist, we take, a huge number of images and look at retinal scans. And, with the rise of AI, artificial intelligence, you can see that moving in and machine taking over a lot of what we do. And certainly for radiology, it's the same discussion. But it's, the more and more you start to think about the humanities and the art sides of things, it's, the patients definitely want to hear, from physicians and want skilled, physicians in a lot of different areas, right? So it's, it's interesting topics to think about for our medical students for sure.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you bring up the whole notion of the technology and artificial intelligence, particularly. I feel like we're going to come around again to medicine being much more focused on our relationships with the patients, because some of those skills that we've had to have, the technical skills or reading skills like the images, for example, will be taken over. And so it's going to be our job to be the interpreters and the person that actually engages with people to help them with that. And I find that really interesting because I think the arts could have a huge role in that.
For sure. No doubt. Absolutely. Now, another hat that you wear is as a researcher. And so is most of the research, is it sort of a combination of humanities interfacing with pediatric neurology, like as the interface epilepsy, or just walk us through a little bit about that?
So I've got, one of my roles as Director of Humanities is I do actually mentor research and medicine students. So all of our medical students have to do a research project throughout their 4 years. And so I do function as a mentor. So I offer different projects for students to do and I supervise that. And I'm also a RIM director. So you just help students a few per year to make sure that they meet all the deadlines that they're supposed to do. So I've got a number of different projects on the go because of that. But my own personal interest, there's a bunch of things right now, but I'll focus on one because I think it's relevant to what we talked about, is I've been working closely the last 3 years with Dr. Mark Gilbert, who's a portrait artist originally from Glasgow. So we're the dynamic duo from Scotland. And so he's an incredibly talented artist, and he did his PhD at the University of Nebraska in qualitative research with portraiture. And so we used portraiture to look at the lived experience of children with epilepsy and their families. So as he was painting the children, he got the family's life story essentially about what it's been like, who they are, what's been hard for them. And then we combined that with semi-structured interviews to really understand what life is like. And our goal is to take the show on the road with the data to really help people understand at a much deeper level what kind of issues families face and how it changes their life actually to have a child with intractable epilepsy.
Wow. And did you get some feedback at this preliminary stage from the family members? What's their how do they feel about this whole project?
Well, it was pretty amazing. So the art show was, we got the chance to display it at the St. John Arts Centre in the fall.
Wow.
And the families came to the opening and also to a workshop that I offered during the time it was up. And they were really taken with the whole show. I mean, it was a very different experience. And it is a strange experience for people to be painted per se. But the kids, most of the kids had developmental issues and didn't, they were quite into it. They actually quite enjoyed it. And so I think the families, I think, are quite proud they were part of it. And so I think we're looking forward to seeing what I can do with that, because my hope is I can use it for advocacy to help them with some of the needs that they might have, particularly as children transition from teens into adult care.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now, looking at the next sort of 5-10 years of your career, what are you sort of very passionate about over the next time horizon?
So one of the things that's been really amazing, if I could turn the clock back, I wish I'd done this sooner, but I've gotten very involved since I came to New Brunswick in medical education. And I love teaching. I always did. I was always involved with it, even in grad school. And I really love seeing people get it. I see the light bulb come on and see them get excited about the thinking process and actually how to develop your differential diagnosis, how to problem solve. And it's a lot of fun for me to watch students really come to that point. So I really hope to remain involved in teaching for quite a while to come, and also have that research piece as part of that as well.
Wonderful.
I'm also interested in the culture of medicine and the challenges that we face, particularly with burnout and stress. And is there a way from a humanities perspective to start shifting the thinking and create a more supportive community of practice for all of us, because I believe that'll help learners as well.
And just kind of along those lines, I mean, if we can drill down a little bit for students on that. I mean, in your own life, are there certain tactics that you use? I mean, we've talked a little bit about, having other external activities that keep you grounded or balanced, but is there other specific tactical things, meditation or other things that you might recommend that have been helpful for you?
So I would say music's my meditation, but I've actually more recently taken up yoga, and I didn't think it'd be something I'd enjoy because I'm a kind of a go kind of person. I also enjoy the outdoors, so I paddleboard. I live on a river, and I paddleboard, and for me that's very meditative because you're just focused on the movement and it's not fast. And it's a lot of fun, and you're out there with nature and just being present in it, and so I really enjoy that. I also like kayaking, so those things is creating that space to do those things. So don't think you don't have time, you have to just do it. Getting up and going for a swim, whatever it might be.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I saw a documentary on a neurologist who kind of quit seeing patients and essentially spent most of his time, skateboarding and just being on roller skates, and part of the discussion was all around the kind of rhythmic movement, of some sports, and also of water in general. And how it can reduce cortisol levels and how it can reduce stress levels. And so I think there is something to certain activities that are at a certain frequency that seem to calm us naturally.
Oh, completely. I mean, there's some interesting studies on music related to that as well, that even singing in a choir can reduce your cortisol level. And there's also a real camaraderie and sense of team that develops when you sing together. And so I find all of that a really fascinating concept, because I sometimes think we should have choirs in all our workplaces, but nobody will go for that, though, I don't think.
A couple of quick questions now. Overall, from everything you've done, a career in medicine, is it as you look back, and you see some of these 20-year-olds starting to consider a career in medicine, is it A plus? Is it, something you highly recommend? Is it, just walk us through that a little bit.
I'm not saying I don't know if I'd say I would highly recommend, because I think there's a shift in medicine, and I think it's important to go in with your eyes open about that. I mean, the prestige of medicine has shifted a little bit, for one thing, and I sometimes don't think the students coming in have a really in-depth understanding of what you're giving up to be involved in medicine. And so and even when you tell somebody that, it's hard for them to get their head around until you're living it. But just being aware of the impact on your time, your emotional energy, your relationships in your life, and yeah, and just that level of fatigue that happens, particularly when you're in training with call, things like that. I mean, I know for me personally, when I got into second year residency, I almost quit because I thought, I can't do this. This is crazy. Like, I was on call 1 and 2. I was up all night, basically would go home, go to sleep, get up the next day, start all over again. And I mean, I'm glad I stuck with it. It's just to understand that there's going to be those points where you feel like that, and to have people you can talk to, I think, is really key. Who you can be really honest with, because everyone in medicine has that whole imposter syndrome, that you don't think you're good enough, or you don't know why people took me to do this, because you don't think you're able to. And just having supportive colleagues, friends around, I think, is key for people to maintain their sanity and health. Yeah.
And for those who are interested in a career in medicine, so there may be high school students, or just any advice as to, how to best explore the potential of being a physician?
I think you want to talk to people at different points in their career, so you have a sense of really what it's like to have it evolve.
That's a good
Because
point.
it takes time. If you're first out, you're a little more anxious when you first go out in practice, because it's all of a sudden the buck stops here, and you tend to mellow a little as you get older. So having that sense from people that have been around the block a little bit can be helpful, I think, and just having a chance to talk to them about what their life's like, and some of the questions you're asking me today, like what do you do to keep yourself well and have fun in your life.
I'm gonna ask you one last question. Advice to your 20-year-old self.
That's an interesting one, because I think I would tell that person, do what you really feel passionate about, like do what really turns your crank, so to speak, because that's what keeps you going. That's what gets you up in the morning and makes you excited about what you're doing. And so having those things that you can look forward to, and feel like it's worth being there for, is so critical, I think. Because I always get sad when I hear people sounding tired and burned out and cynical, because in order to provide good care and to maintain our relationships with our patients and colleagues, we have to still enjoy what we do. And so you have to find ways to do that. And so if you chose it because you were passionate about it, that makes it a lot easier.
That's great advice. It's funny. I was just earlier this morning. I was reading a Medium article, and it was written by a police officer who was super passionate about being in a music band, but his father was very much a pragmatist, and was like, it's fine and dandy to have that as a as a hobby, but you need to put turkey on the table, or so to speak. And so so he was in a 25-year career as a police officer, and I think chief of police and whatever. But the Medium article was quite interesting, because it was like, I went into the structured life, and here's the benefits of going into a structured life. And here, it taught me a lot about how, time management, how to interact with different people, X, Y, and Z. So it's a lot of skills. And he's come sort of full circle, because now he's like, okay, but there are areas that I miss being a musician. So now he's a writer. So I think the important thing for everyone is to at least think deeply about these things, right? So there's two routes you can go down, is choosing your passion, which may be, if you're a writer or if you're an artist, maybe kind of riskier in a cash flow sort of standpoint. But then there's a whole other discussion whether, how do you really value your time? Is it money or not, as well? So there are interesting things I think that everyone needs to think about.
And I do think that's an interesting point, because if I were to give advice to students, money doesn't buy you happiness.
I agree 100%. Yeah.
You have to, those relationships you create and time are so precious. We only get one chance at this life, and so you need to really think about, how do you want to fill that? I mean, I have a very full life, and I get teased about that from friends and that said, you make me tired just talking about what you're doing. And yet I try to choose things that are life-giving and fun and make me excited, about being there. So I think if you do that, it gives you the energy to do it, and keep going.
Yeah. We actually have a question coming in from one of our students who are watching live right now,
Okay.
and they're saying, somewhat serendipitously, they are torn between congenital cardio and peds neuro. Can you comment on what it would be like to choose between, I guess, a pediatric cardiologist versus a pediatric neurologist?
Wow. So that's exactly the choice I made. And so I ended up choosing neurology because what was amazing to me is, if you do general pediatric neurology, you're dealing with diseases of the brain, the spine, the nerves, the neuromuscular junction, and the muscles. So there's quite an incredible variety, which can be challenging at times, because you have to kind of know all about all of those things. But it's also quite fun in the sense that it's like a detective story. I always thought of it like that you have this problem to solve and get to the diagnosis. And I mean, again, you have to be able to live with the bread and butter. So if I were to say to somebody, you have to pick between different disciplines, you have to decide what you're going to see mostly on a daily basis. Can you live with that? And so for me, if I didn't enjoy looking after children with epilepsy, then I couldn't do my job. But I find that really interesting for all sorts of reasons. And that's what you need to decide. Which of these ones can you live with, because of what you'll see most of the time? Oh, there's always going to be the weird and wonderful and really unusual things that come along, but it's not every day.
That's very, very true. Well, Dr. Stewart, it's really been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Keep up the wonderful work, and I love always talking to people who are passionate about humanities. So it really was a pleasure. To everyone else out there, thanks so much for watching. Feel free to drop us a line. We're working on a number of great guests coming on shortly, and we always welcome your questions, and also feel free to subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you again.